The forest was burning. Flakes of ash fell like snow across the frozen fields of Bastogne. The wind howled through shattered trees, carrying the smell of cordite, pine sap, and blood. Men crouched in foxholes, their faces black with soot and exhaustion, breath turning to mist that hung over their rifles. Somewhere beyond the smoke, an engine roared. German armor, close. A whisper crackled through the field phone. Hold fast. No surrender. Private Jack Merriman of the 101st Airborne pressed his back against the mud wall, clutching a frost-coated M1 Garand. Around him the line was gone. Communications were dead. The Germans had encircled them. By every calculation, the screaming eagles were finished. Then, in the bitter cold silence between shell bursts, the woods answered with something impossible. The deep, rhythmic hum of engines that should not have been there. The sound rolled in from the north, low and steady, like thunder crawling over the horizon. Every man froze. The Germans stopped firing, and for one suspended heartbeat, both armies stared through the smoke, listening to a phantom force that would rewrite the fate of Bastogne. We thought we were dead, but the trap they had fallen into was their own. The morning of December 20th, 1944, broke under a sky the color of lead. In the fields west of Bastogne, the 101st Airborne Division dug in beneath a storm of artillery that never seemed to stop. The men had been promised relief. None came, supplies were gone. Ammunition ran low enough that some counted every round in their pocket before firing. Inside a ruined farmhouse that served as a command post, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe spread a torn map across a door laid flat on 2 crates. His officers crowded around, faces lit by the dim orange glow of a kerosene lamp. Outside, snow drifted through shattered windows. Each gust blew in the scream of distant shells. McAuliffe tapped the map with a pencil. They've got armor here, here, and here. We're the cork in their bottle. If we move, the Germans pour through to the Meuse. Colonel Harper, commanding the 327th Glider Infantry, rubbed his eyes. Sir, with respect, and the cork's starting to crack. McAuliffe looked up, jaw tight. Then we hold what's left until it doesn't. He didn't say it, but every man in the room knew. They were cut off. The silence of Bastogne. The encirclement came slowly, like a tightening noose. For days, the 101st had fought in blizzards so thick that visibility dropped to 10 yards. Trees exploded from artillery hits, showering men with splinters and frozen sap. The roads were clogged with wrecked jeeps and overturned wagons. Communications were a rumor. The radio net jammed, field wires shredded by shell fire. Private Merriman's squad held a line near Foy, watching the horizon through fogged binoculars. Every shape looked like an advancing column. They hadn't slept more than an hour at a time in 3 days. Can't even tell if it's day or night anymore, muttered Corporal Benson, his breath smoking in the air. Feels like the world's ended and nobody told us. Merriman didn't answer. He was staring at the tree line where black shapes moved among the snow-covered pines. For a heartbeat, he thought they were Germans, until one raised a hand and disappeared again. He turned to Benson. Did you see that? Benson shook his head. See what? Someone out there, wearing our gear. Inside the trap that afternoon, the first German messenger arrived under a white flag. A young officer from the 47th Panzer Corps, flanked by 2 soldiers. He was escorted to McAuliffe's command post. Snow dripped from his overcoat as he saluted stiffly. I am instructed, he said in precise English, to convey to you a written order for your surrender. The paper was neat, typewritten, signed by General Heinrich von Luttwitz. It promised honorable treatment if the Americans laid down their arms. McAuliffe read it once, then again, lips tightening. He looked at his staff, who waited in tense silence. Then he smiled, a small, tired, incredulous smile. "Aw, nuts," he said. The room erupted in laughter, not from humor, but from the sheer insanity of it. Outside, artillery thundered like distant applause. McAuliffe handed the note back. You can tell your general, nuts. The German blinked, uncertain. Pardon? The staff translator leaned in. It means go to hell. Within hours, the story spread through the perimeter like wildfire. Nuts became a password, a rallying cry. A joke told through chattering teeth between bursts of shellfire. Men scrawled it on helmets, carved it into tree trunks, whispered it into the cold night as if the word itself could defy death. The trap turns. That night, something strange happened on the northern line. German armor had advanced under cover of fog. their half-tracks grinding through snow-clogged roads toward the 501st Parachute Infantry's positions. But halfway through the approach, the column stopped. From the woods ahead came engine noise, deep, steady, and close. Panzer crews strained to listen. The sound grew louder, dozens, maybe hundreds of engines idling unseen. The Germans believed they'd stumbled into an ambush. They pulled back to regroup. In reality, there were no tanks, no reinforcements, only the echo of engines bouncing through the forest valley, the result of broken-down American trucks left running to keep batteries warm, and the geography of the Ardennes turning that noise into a phantom army. Merriman would later write, "The woods did our lying for us. The Germans thought Patton had arrived. We thought we'd been saved. Both were wrong." The men who wouldn't die by Christmas Eve, temperatures had dropped below -10 Celsius. Rations were frozen solid. Medics wrapped amputated limbs in snow because morphine had run out. Yet morale held, a brittle, stubborn flame fueled by exhaustion and pride. Sergeant George Koskimaki, McAuliffe's radio operator, scribbled notes by candlelight. Men still joking, still alive, enemy all around. No fear. At midnight, a shell hit the church in Bastogne that served as a field hospital. The stained glass windows shattered, scattering shards across wounded men lying on stretchers. A chaplain stepped through the dust, his voice calm. "God's still here, boys." Outside in the square, paratroopers sang carols under shell bursts. Their voices wavered but did not stop. The Germans listened from their lines, confused, unnerved. In the morning, leaflets fell from the sky dropped by Allied C-47s. "Hold fast. Patton is coming." The men laughed bitterly. "About time," someone muttered. But when the 4th Armored Division finally broke through 3 days later, what they found wasn't a defeated garrison. It was a division still standing, gaunt, half-frozen, but unbroken. Aftermath: when journalists arrived, they expected to film survivors. What they captured instead looked like ghosts. Faces hollow, eyes hollow. Men who had lived inside death and found it wasn't empty. Private Merriman was one of them. In his diary he wrote, "We thought we were dead. The ground was full of bodies, the sky full of fire, but the world didn't end. It just waited." He kept his helmet, a dented shell with the word nuts scratched into the side, until his death in 1972. Snow fell that night without sound. It coated the foxholes, the helmets, the bodies that no one had the strength to bury. The men of the 101st Airborne huddled in their shallow trenches, rifles wrapped in burlap, boots stiff as iron from frozen mud. The shelling had stopped for now, replaced by an uneasy stillness that made every heartbeat sound too loud. Private Merriman had stopped writing in his journal because his fingers no longer obeyed him. The pencil slipped from his grip, lost in the snow. He watched the sky instead, a sky too dark to be seen except when the distant horizon flashed with the slow pulse of artillery somewhere beyond Bastogne. The war had become a kind of rhythm. Fire, silence, fire, silence. At 300 hours, the ground began to hum. At first it was faint, a low vibration beneath the frost, like a train far away. The men looked at one another. "Artillery trucks," someone muttered. "Has to be," but the sound didn't fade. It grew louder, steadier. It wasn't coming from any direction. It was everywhere, rolling through the trees like thunder caught between the hills. Merriman leaned out of his hole, scanning the fog. His breath hung before him, a thin white ghost. "You hear that?" Benson nodded. "Yeah, tanks," Merriman swallowed. "Whose?" No one answered. At dawn, reconnaissance confirmed what no one believed. The German armored spearhead that had threatened the eastern flank had stopped. Not retreated, not engaged, just stopped, holding position as if waiting for something. Captain Macaulay, commanding the 506th, squinted through binoculars at the distant ridgeline. "They could have rolled straight through us last night." "Why the hell didn't they?" Sergeant Koskimaki, standing beside him, said quietly, "Because they thought somebody was waiting for them." Macaulay turned. "Who?" Koskimaki pointed toward the fog, toward the phantom sound still rising from the forest. The forest's deception, the Ardennes, had become a maze of echoes. Frozen valleys carried sound for miles. Each gunshot bounced from ridge to ridge until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Abandoned vehicles, still running to keep their engines from freezing, magnified the illusion. The faint drone of idling motors merged with the wind until the forest itself seemed alive, breathing, whispering, moving. By midday, German scouts reported hearing what sounded like hundreds of vehicles assembling north of Bastogne. Command radioed for confirmation. None came. The 47th Panzer Corps intelligence officer scribbled in his log, "Enemy armor activity confirmed north sector. Recommend delay of assault," but there was no armor. Only the ghosts of engines, the same broken-down jeeps and trucks the 101st had abandoned when fuel ran out. Merriman later recalled, "The forest was lying for us. Every sound it made was on our side." At headquarters, McAuliffe listened to the reports with cautious disbelief. "You're telling me the Germans are holding back because of noise?" "Yes, sir," replied a young signal officer. "Our empty trucks are doing the fighting for us." McAuliffe looked at the map, then smiled faintly. "Then let them. We'll let the trees play general for a while." But privately, even he couldn't shake the unease. The line was holding, but for the wrong reasons. It felt as if the forest itself had decided to intervene, a neutral god mocking both armies. Across the line inside, the German perimeter, confusion spread. Messages from the front contradicted one another, some reporting heavy American counterattacks, others insisting the enemy had fled. A panzer commander named Major Kurt Bremer recorded in his diary, "Radio unreliable. Our scouts claim to hear tanks but see none. The men are restless. The forest makes strange sounds at night." He wasn't wrong. That evening, as snow began to fall again, Bremer ordered a patrol to advance toward the sound. 6 men went out, moving through the trees under moonlight. They never returned. The next morning, another patrol found their bodies, rifles still slung, eyes open, no bullet wounds. "Frostbite and shock," the medic wrote, but the men who recovered them swore their expressions looked like terror, not cold. Bremer ordered silence about the incident. "If the forest wants to whisper, let it whisper," he told his aide. "We have enough ghosts without inventing new ones." The prayer line back in Bastogne, morale was thinning to a thread. The men were starving. Medical supplies were gone. Planes couldn't reach them through the weather. In the church basement, Captain Gordon Carson, the chaplain, held what he called the prayer line. Every night, soldiers gathered in a circle lit by candles salvaged from German supply crates. They prayed not for victory but for warmth, for sleep, for one more sunrise. On Christmas night, he read from a pocket Bible, his voice trembling. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." Outside, artillery rolled again, shaking the walls. A chunk of plaster fell from the ceiling and landed on the Bible. Carson brushed it off and kept reading. Merriman stood at the back, helmet off, head bowed. He didn't believe much in God, but in that moment he believed in sound, in voices and words that filled the dark. The same power that kept men fighting also kept them alive. Later, when a shell hit the square, the shock wave blew out every candle. For a few seconds, the only light in Bastogne was the red glow of burning trees and the faint reflection in the frozen eyes of the dead. Messages in the snow. By December 26th, the weather began to break. For the first time in days, a thin sun cut through the clouds. Recon planes could finally fly, and with them came something the Germans did not expect: paratroopers dropping supply crates instead of men. The first crate cracked open near Merriman's foxhole. Inside was ammunition, medical kits, and a box of chocolate bars wrapped in green paper labeled "From Home." He laughed, a dry, astonished sound. "We're ghosts eating candy," he said to Benson, who grinned despite cracked lips. By noon, the men were shooting again, short, careful bursts. The air smelled like hope for the first time in a week, but then came a new message over the captured German radio. A voice in perfect English. "This is General McAuliffe. We are breaking out. Hold your fire." Every man froze. They had no working transmitter. McAuliffe was still in the farmhouse. So who was speaking? For hours, confusion rippled through the line. Some units believed reinforcements were finally moving. Others thought it was a German trick. Then came more voices, overlapping, distorted, issuing orders that contradicted one another. Advance north. Fall back. Hold positions. The forest was alive with false commands. Later analysis would show that German intelligence had begun broadcasting fake American transmissions, hoping to lure paratroopers from their positions. But the interference cut both ways. The dense terrain twisted every echo until even the Germans couldn't tell what was real. McAuliffe slammed his fist against the radio. "Turn it off. If we're going to die, we'll do it to our own silence." From that moment on, the men relied only on hand signals, runners, and instinct. The trap within the trap that same evening. A German armored battalion advanced toward the southern road, the last escape route out of Bastogne. They expected to find the Americans retreating. Instead, they walked straight into a minefield the 326th Engineers had planted days earlier and forgotten about. The first tank detonated at 1830 hours, lighting the valley like sunrise. The explosion triggered others, chain reactions echoing down the line. To the Americans, it looked like the forest itself was fighting back. Flashes of light, thunder rolling through snow, the enemy devoured by its own momentum. "Jesus Christ," Benson whispered as he watched fire ripple across the horizon. "It's like they walked into hell." But to the Germans, it looked like a deliberate trap, perfectly timed, perfectly executed. By midnight, von Lüttwitz ordered his southern attack to halt. His report to higher command read simply, "Enemy deception effective. Request withdrawal and reorganization." The trap that had been meant for the 101st had turned against its makers. The long night. When Patton's tanks finally reached the perimeter 2 days later, Merriman didn't cheer. He just stared. The soldiers who had been ghosts now looked like men again, but hollowed, changed. General McAuliffe met the lead column at the edge of town. The tank commander saluted. "Glad to see you, sir. Thought we'd never make it." McAuliffe smiled faintly. "We thought we were dead." The line became legend, passed from foxhole to foxhole, from field to memory. What neither side fully understood was that Bastogne had not been saved by numbers or strategy. It had been saved by illusion, by a landscape that lied so perfectly that truth and trickery became the same thing. The Germans thought the 101st had set a trap. The 101st thought they'd stumbled into one. Both were wrong. The forest had done it on its own. Years later, when veterans of both armies met at reunions in the Ardennes, some would talk about the night the woods hummed. They would raise glasses of beer, fall silent, and one might whisper, "You heard it too, didn't you?" And every man, regardless of the flag he'd once served, would nod. The snow melted just enough to reveal what the fire had hidden. Beneath the churned earth of Bastogne's perimeter, frozen mud glistened like oil, scarred with tank treads that led nowhere. The forest was quiet again, too quiet. After the thunder of the past week, silence felt unnatural, like the pause between breaths. Private Jack Merriman sat against a shattered tree, sharpening his bayonet with a fragment of steel torn from a wrecked half-track. His hands shook, not from cold but from something deeper, a vibration that hadn't left his bones since that night when the ground itself had seemed to hum. Around him, men smoked in silence, their faces drawn and hollow. "Feels like it's waiting," Benson muttered, breaking the hush. Merriman glanced up. "What is?" The woods, he was right. The wind had died. No birds, no snowmelt dripping from the branches. The forest was listening. At headquarters, McAuliffe stood before a field map littered with pencil marks and coffee stains. The 101st had held against everything, armor, artillery, cold, but the strangest reports were now coming from their own patrols. Men swore they'd heard shouting where there were no units. Others claimed to see American helmets moving through fog, only to vanish when approached. Lieutenant Haynes, a radio operator from the 501st, brought in a captured German headset. "Sir, they've been transmitting again," he said. "Not orders, recordings," McAuliffe frowned. "Recordings of what?" Haynes hesitated. "Us." He set the headphones down and pressed play. Out of the static came a voice unmistakably American shouting, "Hold the line! The tanks are behind us," followed by laughter. Then silence. The general's jaw tightened. Where'd they get this? Haynes swallowed. They're rebroadcasting fragments they captured off our frequencies. Our own fear turned against us. That night, the line between imagination and tactics dissolved completely. The Germans began blasting loudspeakers through the forest, looping fragments of English orders mixed with static and distant tank engines. They wanted to provoke panic. to make the paratroopers think their own command had broken down. But it backfired. To the men of the 101st, half frozen, half delirious, the sounds only confirmed what they already believed, that something larger, something unseen was moving through the woods with them. They no longer feared the noise. They followed it. Merriman's platoon advanced into the tree line one night, guided by what they thought were American voices. Instead, they stumbled onto a German patrol doing the same thing, drawn by the same phantom echo. For a second, both groups stared through the snow, rifles half raised. Then a shell burst overhead, showering them with ice and pine needles. Neither side fired. Both simply fell back, vanishing into opposite directions, each convinced they'd just met ghosts. The Phantom Front. By December 27th, the fighting around Bastogne had become a theater of illusions. Tanks advanced toward gunfire that didn't exist. Infantry chased echoes. Command posts moved by instinct, not orders. Even Patton's approaching relief force was unsure which sounds were real. An American artillery captain later described it in his log. "We were fighting an enemy we could hear but not see. Sometimes I think they were fighting the same thing." McAuliffe called it the Phantom Front. On the map, it was chaos, units misplaced, fire missions landing in empty valleys. Yet somehow the line held. Historians would later say it was coincidence, terrain, luck. The men who were there knew better. The forest had become a weapon neither side understood. The German perspective. In the ruins of a farmhouse east of Bastogne, Major Bremer pored over intercepted transmissions with his adjutant. The voices on the reel-to-reel recorder whispered through static like ghosts arguing. "Sector B clear. No retreat. They're coming through the trees." Bremer rubbed his temples. "It makes no sense. Every order contradicts the last." His adjutant whispered, "Sir, the men think the Americans have found a new kind of radio." Bremer snorted. "No, this is something else. The valley itself is playing tricks." He looked out the window. Across the snow, faint flashes lit the horizon. Flame from invisible artillery, thunder from phantom tanks. "We're fighting shadows," he said. "And losing." Inside the lines for Merriman's company, reality had begun to fold in on itself. They slept in shifts, ate what they could scavenge. When rations ran out again, they boiled snow with fragments of chocolate bars to make foxhole coffee. One evening, as they prepared to move positions, a figure stumbled out of the fog, a paratrooper in full gear, face blackened with soot. He was breathing hard, eyes wide. "Where's Easy Company?" he asked. Benson raised his rifle. "Who's asking?" The stranger looked confused. "Corporal Lattimore. 506th. We got separated 3 nights ago." Merriman stared. "There is no 506th here anymore." "They pulled out." Lattimore blinked. "No, sir. We've been fighting north of the ridge. There's a whole line up there." But when he led them to the spot, nothing. Just snow, burnt trees, silence. Lattimore's footprints vanished halfway down the slope. They never found him again. Psychological warfare. By the 3rd week, the 101st's command staff realized the battle had entered a different phase. What mattered now wasn't territory but morale, the invisible thread keeping men from breaking. Captain Carson, the chaplain, wrote in his diary, "The enemy's strongest weapon is despair. Our countermeasure must be meaning." So he began broadcasting his own messages through a salvaged German loudspeaker. His voice carried across the frozen valleys. "You are not forgotten. Hold your ground. You are the line that will be remembered." The men listened from their holes, shivering, smiling faintly. The Germans heard it too. Some later claimed that the chaplain's voice was so calm, they mistook it for propaganda from their own side. For a few nights, both armies shared the same lullaby. The false reinforcements at 0500 on December 28th. Scouts reported engine noise approaching from the west. Multiple vehicles, heavy tread, unmistakably American. Flares went up. "Patton's here," someone shouted. Men rose from their foxholes, waving their helmets. Cheering through cracked lips, the sound drew closer, then vanished. No lights, no tracks, no tanks, only the echo of what might have been. Later, radar logs showed no aircraft, no convoys. Some blamed weather inversion, others enemy trickery. But to the men on the ground, it felt like betrayal. Hope itself turned into another lie. Merriman wrote that night, "We believed the sound before we believed ourselves. That's how you lose a war and how you win one. Breaking point. The temperature dropped again. Frost formed on eyelids and rifle bolts. Medics found men sitting upright in their foxholes, frozen solid, still clutching their weapons. Yet even as bodies failed, the perimeter held. The Germans, demoralized and half-starved themselves, began to pull back. Radio intercepts caught snippets of resignation. No advance possible. Enemy still resists. Weather worsening. The trap had reversed completely. The 101st no longer defended Bastogne. They haunted it. One captured German later told his interrogator, "We thought you were dead. You kept fighting anyway." When the translator repeated it to Merriman, he only smiled. "We thought so too." The return of sound on December 29th, the weather cleared for good. The first Allied tanks broke through the southern road, snow spraying under their treads. The sky roared with C-47s dropping supplies, parachutes blooming white against the blue. As the first crates hit the ground, Merriman collapsed against a snowbank and laughed until he cried. Around him, others did the same. For the first time in weeks, the sounds of war were real. Metal, engines, human voices. The ghosts had retreated, or so they thought. That night, long after the shelling ended, Merriman was on sentry duty near the tree line. The forest was black and still. He lit a cigarette with shaking hands. Then he heard it again. The hum. Faint, distant, rising from the valley like the heartbeat of the earth. He closed his eyes, listening. It wasn't engines this time. It was singing, low, wordless, hundreds of voices blending into one. He couldn't tell if it was English or German. Maybe both. He whispered to himself, "We thought we were dead." And in the darkness, the forest seemed to whisper back, "You were." By dawn, the sound was gone. Patton's columns rolled through Bastogne, their tracks crushing the ice that had held the division prisoner. The war moved on, but for those who'd lived through the siege, the memory of that phantom front never left. In interviews decades later, veterans described the same feeling, that Bastogne hadn't been won by strategy or courage, but by something stranger, a moment when fear itself became a weapon, when both armies mistook echoes for armies and ghosts for allies. And maybe, Merriman would write in old age, that's what war truly is, a noise that never stops echoing. The roads into Bastogne were rivers of mud when the 4th Armored Division finally broke through. Tanks churned through snow and wreckage. Jeeps rolled past smoldering barns and trees shredded to splinters. The air smelled of cordite and pine sap, the perfume of survival. Civilians emerged from cellars, dazed, blinking, faces white with dust. Children watched as American soldiers stumbled past thin as scarecrows, wrapped in blankets and laughter that sounded more like disbelief. The siege was over, but the silence it left behind was worse than the gunfire. Private Merriman and what was left of his squad rode into the town square on the back of a supply truck. Snow had melted into brown slush, pooling around burned-out vehicles. Bastogne looked like the aftermath of a storm that had taken everything and decided to stay. General McAuliffe stood beside a Sherman tank, shaking hands with Patton's officers. Flashbulbs popped. Reporters shouted questions. "General, how did you hold?" Someone called. McAuliffe smiled faintly. "We didn't have a choice." Merriman stood at the edge of the crowd, watching the generals, the cameras, the flags. None of it felt real. The faces around him looked like ghosts wearing borrowed skin. Echoes in the ruins that night, the fires burned low across the town. Engineers dug graves while medics searched for survivors in the rubble. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once, then fell silent. Merriman sat outside what was left of a cafe, drinking melted snow from a tin cup. Sergeant Benson joined him, limping slightly, his uniform torn at the sleeve. "They say it's over," Benson muttered. "Yeah," Merriman said, not looking up. "But it doesn't sound over." Benson frowned. "What do you mean?" Merriman pointed toward the dark tree line beyond the town. "Listen." The wind hissed through the pines, and beneath it faintly something mechanical. A pulse. Benson shook his head. Probably Patton's trucks. But they both knew it wasn't. At dawn, a radio team from the Signal Corps arrived to restore communications. Their sergeant, Harry Levine, was a wiry man from Brooklyn who'd seen too many miracles to believe in any of them. He climbed onto the roof of the half-collapsed town hall to reconnect the long-range antenna. Half an hour later, he came down pale and silent. "General," he said, "you need to hear this." He tuned the field radio to a frequency just below the Allied band. Out of the static came a series of bursts, rhythmic, deliberate. Not Morse, not voice, something in between. McAuliffe listened, frowning. Is that one of ours? Levine shook his head. No, sir, it's repeating itself. Over and over. The signal continued for hours, steady as a heartbeat. The abandoned station 2 days later. An investigation team traced the signal to its source, an abandoned German outpost north of Foy. Merriman volunteered to go along, eager for something to do that didn't involve digging graves. The team consisted of 6 men, 3 engineers, 2 infantrymen, and a translator. They moved through the forest cautiously. Snow had melted into thick mud, sucking at their boots. The woods smelled of iron and decay. Birds had returned, but their calls were hesitant, broken. The outpost was a ruin, a cluster of log bunkers half buried in snowdrifts. The main shelter's door hung open, creaking softly in the wind. Inside, the air was damp and cold, thick with the metallic scent of old machinery. On a table lay a field transmitter the size of a coffin, still humming faintly. A reel of magnetic wire turned slowly, repeating the same few seconds of sound. A deep pulsing drone that rose and fell like breathing. Levine knelt beside it, examining the controls. It's German, he said. But this model's different. Modified. The translator pointed to a stencil on the casing. Nachhalgerät V2. Resonanzabteilung. Merriman frowned. What's that mean? The man hesitated. Reverberation device. Resonance division. The experiment. The engineers searched the rest of the bunker. In a side chamber, they found boxes of recording reels labeled with dates from early December, before the siege began. Each one contained fragments of voice transmissions, orders, shouts, even laughter. One of the engineers threaded a reel onto a player and hit play. The room filled with static. Then McAuliffe's own voice echoed back, "Hold fast. No surrender." Everyone froze. Levine swore softly. They recorded us. The translator nodded. They used your broadcast, recycled them, played them back through amplifiers across the valley. Merriman shivered. That's what we heard in the woods. The translator looked grim. Yes. The Germans were testing psychological interference. See how troops respond when they think they're surrounded by their own voices. He ran a hand through his hair. But it worked too well. They fooled themselves too. The circle of sound. The more they explored, the clearer it became. The forest itself had been wired for deception. Long cables ran through the trees, connecting hidden loudspeakers disguised as tree stumps. Some had been destroyed by shell fire, but others still worked, emitting faint static when touched. Merriman followed one of the lines through the underbrush until it vanished into a frozen stream bed. There, tangled in the roots of a pine, lay a German helmet with headphones still attached, its owner buried beneath a thin layer of ice. He crouched down, staring. Inside the helmet, the speaker still crackled faintly, whispering fragments of words. He couldn't tell if it was English or German anymore. He stood up slowly and whispered, "You never turned it off, did you?" The investigation. When the team returned to Bastogne with the reels, McAuliffe ordered them sealed and sent to Allied intelligence. But copies circulated quietly among officers, spreading unease. The recordings didn't just contain voices, they contained tone, rhythm, cadence. To some listeners, it sounded like chanting. Captain Carson, the chaplain, played one of the tapes late one night in the church, alone. He wrote afterward in his journal, "It began as men shouting orders, but after a minute it turned into something else, a single sound, rising and falling like breath. I could almost hear words in it like prayer or confession. It frightened me more than any shell." He never played it again. Aftermath. By the first week of January, Bastogne was secure. Patton's troops pushed the German line back toward the Rhine. The 101st was relieved, decorated, and immortalized. Reporters called it a miracle of courage, but for the men who'd been there, it wasn't a miracle. It was something they couldn't explain. When Merriman was debriefed, an officer asked him how the division had managed to hold with so few supplies. He shrugged. "We thought help was coming. We heard it. On the radio?" He shook his head. "Everywhere." The quiet men weeks later, the resonance investigation moved to London. Allied scientists studied the captured transmitters and concluded that the devices had used overlapping, frequencies to create acoustic illusions and sounds that seemed to come from all directions. But one British researcher added a note. Subjects exposed for prolonged periods may experience residual perception, continued auditory phenomena after source removal. Merriman would have called it simpler. We kept hearing the war even when it was gone. Echoes beyond Bastogne. In the months that followed, strange reports trickled in from other sectors. Soldiers claiming to hear phantom orders, tanks rumbling where none existed. Some believed remnants of the German system were still transmitting. Others thought the forest itself had become a resonant chamber, replaying the ghosts of battle. One Signal Corps sergeant wrote, "The Ardennes talks. You just have to know the frequency." In April 1945, when the war finally turned toward Germany, the 101st was redeployed. But Bastogne lingered in their minds, a place where sound had become a weapon, and fear had taken physical form. McAuliffe's reflection years later, at a reunion in 1954. McAuliffe was asked by a journalist about the phantom engines. The general chuckled softly. "We thought it was Patton. Maybe it was just us." He paused, then added, "War's full of echoes. Some die fast, some never do." The last tape in 1961. Long after Merriman had returned home to Ohio, a parcel arrived from a friend in the Signal Corps. Inside was a reel labeled Bastogne source copy. He hesitated for days before playing it. When he finally did, the sound was faint but unmistakable. The hum, the breathing, the layered voices. But near the end of the recording, as static swallowed the signal, one clear phrase emerged in English. Low and exhausted. "We thought we were dead." Then silence. Merriman sat for a long time in the dark, the reel still turning long after it had ended. The forest outside Bastogne stands quiet now. Tourists walk the trails where men once froze and dreamed of home. The trees have grown back, tall and straight, but on certain winter mornings the wind through their branches sounds almost like engines. Locals say that if you listen long enough, you can hear voices carried in the frost, American, German, it doesn't matter. They all say the same thing. Hold fast. No surrender. And somewhere between those words, the echo of the trap that fooled both armies still hums, soft as breath, endless as memory. The snow fell differently in 1970. It came heavier, softer, carrying the weight of years gone still. Bastogne had become a monument by then. Stone markers, plaques, the polished glass of the Mardennes Memorial gleaming under a pale Belgian sun. Tourists walked where foxholes once scarred the earth. Children climbed on rusted tanks turned to playgrounds. The forest, older now, had learned to hide its wounds beneath moss and silence. But to Jack Merriman, returning for the first time in 25 years, the silence felt wrong. He stood at the edge of the woods in his old service coat, one hand resting on the frozen bark of a pine that might have been the same one he'd sheltered behind as a boy. The air smelled of cold metal and memory. A distant bell tolled in the town square. Beside him a young Belgian guide, not even born when the siege happened, asked quietly, "You fought here?" Merriman nodded. "We thought we died here." The guide smiled politely, unsure if it was a joke. Merriman didn't smile back. The return to the woods, he walked alone into the forest, snow crunching beneath his boots. The wind whispered through the trees, faint, uneven. He stopped often, listening. Nothing. Only his heartbeat and the sigh of branches. He followed the ridge down to where the outpost had once been. The bunker was gone now, collapsed into a shallow hollow overgrown with ivy. But when he brushed away the leaves, he saw the faint outline of a metal plate half buried in the soil. He knelt. The plate was stamped with the same words he'd seen in 1944, Nachhalgerät V2. He touched it, and for a moment, he swore he felt it vibrate. He jerked his hand back. The forest fell silent again, as if holding its breath. The forgotten frequency. That night, Merriman stayed in a small inn on the outskirts of town. The owner, an old woman named Elise, remembered the siege well. Her father had been a farmer forced to feed both sides. "You were with the Americans, yes?" she said, pouring him coffee. He nodded. She leaned closer. Do you still hear it? Merriman froze. Hear what? The hum, she said softly. It comes some winters. The radio people say it's just interference from power lines, but my son, he works at the museum. He says sometimes the monitors pick up voices, old ones. Merriman's throat tightened. Voices? Elise nodded. Always the same words. Hold fast. He left the coffee untouched. The museum at Bastogne the next morning, Merriman visited the new Bastogne War Museum, a sleek glass structure built beside the old road where Patton's tanks had rolled through. Inside, the air smelled of wax and paper. Displays showed uniforms behind glass, photographs of men who looked impossibly young. In a dim corner, behind velvet rope, stood a damaged transmitter, the very one recovered from the bunker decades earlier. Its metal casing was corroded, knobs frozen in place, the reels gone. A small plaque read, Experimental German Field Device, Purpose Unknown, Discovered near Foy, December 1944. Merriman stared at it for a long time. Then he saw something. The others hadn't. A small headphone jack, still intact, buried beneath grime. He looked around. The hall was empty. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an old field headset, the same one he'd kept all these years, frayed but functional. He plugged it in. For a few seconds, nothing. Just static. Then, faintly beneath the hiss, came a sound. A heartbeat, then a voice, low, distant, muffled by time. This is Easy Company on holding North Sector. Another voice overlapped it. No surrender. No surrender. Merriman closed his eyes. He could hear Benson laughing in the background, the metallic clatter of rifles, the breath of men who thought they wouldn't live another night. The reel spun, though there was no power. The men who never left later that afternoon, Merriman met with the curator, a historian named Jean-Paul Demain, who had been cataloging unexplained audio phenomena from the region. We've recorded these transmissions for years, Demain said, playing back a tape. Always the same. Low frequencies around 40 kilohertz below normal human speech. They appear only in winter when the air is dense. Locals call it la respiration du bois, the breathing of the woods. He turned the volume up. The hum filled the room. Beneath it, faintly, something like chanting. We thought we were dead. Merriman's hands trembled. Where did you get this? Demain smiled faintly. It's everywhere. The trees act like antennae. The soil carries the signal. It's as if the ground itself remembers. He leaned back in his chair. Do you believe in ghosts, Mr. Merriman? Merriman stared at the speaker, the hum growing louder. I believe in echoes. The last patrol that evening, Merriman returned to the woods with a portable recorder borrowed from Demain. He followed the same path through the snow, past the ridge, to where the bunker had once stood. He set the recorder on the ground and pressed record. At first only wind. Then, slowly, the same pulsing drone began to rise, faint but steady, like a heartbeat deep beneath the earth. He sat down, wrapped his coat tighter, and whispered, All right, I'm listening. The sound grew clearer. Words began to form. Merriman. Hold fast. He froze. You did well. We held. Tears burned his eyes. He wanted to answer, to speak into the recorder, but his throat closed. The forest seemed to breathe around him, a slow exhale through the branches. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the sound stopped. When he played the tape back hours later, there was nothing, only static and the faint hiss of snow. Letters never. Sent in the weeks after his visit, Merriman began to write again, not memoirs but letters addressed to men who had never come home. He wrote to Benson, to Carson, to the nameless ones frozen in their foxholes. He described the memorial, the museum, the world they'd saved and never seen. In one letter he wrote, The forest still talks, but it's tired now. Maybe it remembers too much. Maybe it's waiting for us to stop listening. He never mailed them. He placed them in a small wooden box and buried it beneath the same pine tree he'd touched on his first day back. The signal returns in 1978, 8 years after Merriman's visit. Technicians at a Belgian weather station near Bastogne detected an unexplained transmission during a snowstorm. The pattern matched no known broadcast. When decoded, it produced a faint voice repeating the same phrase over and over. We thought we were dead. The recording was analyzed, dismissed, archived, until 1994, the 50th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge. The museum restored the transmitter for a commemorative exhibit. During testing, the hum returned. Visitors swore they heard words woven through it: laughter, commands, prayer. When Demen was asked about it, he only said, "It's not interference. It's memory." Merriman's final visit. Jack Merriman died in 1996 at the age of 73. His ashes were scattered near the Bastogne woods, at the spot where his company's line had once held. On the morning of his memorial, a light snow fell. The attendees, veterans, locals, children, stood in silence as a bugler played taps. But those closest to the woods swore they heard something else beneath the notes, a soft vibration, like engines idling far away. When the bugle fell silent, the sound lingered for a few seconds more, then faded. Then, no one spoke. The forest keeps its secrets today, decades after the guns fell silent. The Ardennes remains one of the quietest places in Europe. But every winter, when the air thickens and the snow covers the old roads, the same signal returns, faint, pulsing, eternal. Tourists record it on phones. Scientists measure it with instruments. None can explain it. Some say it's the resonance of frozen soil, amplified by mineral layers. Others call it the Merriman frequency. But the old villagers still tell a different story, that the forest remembers its dead, and that every December it replays the moment when fear became courage, when illusion became salvation. When ghosts held a line no living man could. If you stand there on a cold night between the pines where the 101st once waited, you might hear it too. The low hum of engines, the murmur of men who refuse to surrender, and if you listen long, enough. If you let the snow fill your ears and your breath freeze in your chest, you'll hear the last words they ever spoke. Not to the enemy, not to history, but to the silence itself. We thought we were dead. And the wind, cold and kind, will whisper back, "You were, but you held."